Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope you are doing very well today. I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, to answer a question from a viewer that I received some months back, and so I have to apologize to Peter Cacciola for the extreme lateness of my response. I hope you can forgive me, Peter, but you asked me, I think way back in May, this question, and you very kindly allowed me to answer it by video, and I haven't done so until now, so I really apologize for that. I have been thinking about it over the course of these some months, so it's not like I haven't forgotten about it, but this has just been something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I hope you can understand. But I'd like to take the opportunity now to answer the question. And the question that you posed was this. Can I ask a question that you may or may not feel comfortable with? How do you feel about people banning films based on insensitivity of people groups? Okay, so my understanding of your question is, what is my take on the notion of banning a film based on, let's say, persons or a group of people reacting to such film or being offended by such film, for whatever reason that offense may come about. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. So first of all, the question, I just want to be absolutely clear. Peter is not asking, how do you feel about banning films? Right? Because I think banning films and censorship, I think, has a very, if the approach is what I consider to be reasonable, then I think there is a place for this notion of banning and censorship. So in other words, if the reasons justify the banning or censorship, in other words, if there is a justifiable reason for such ban, then I can consider whether or not the ban is indeed proper or not. And I think there are many possible reasons that one might consider that could or could not justify banning a certain film. Maybe because the content is, or something like that. Anyway, so this is not a question necessarily about whether I agree with banning films. I understand this question to mean, do I agree with banning films based on the justification of a group of people being offended by the subject matter of such film? Okay, so does that reason of a group of people being offended by the film justify banning such film? Okay, that's how I understand the question. With that basis, therefore, my answer is no, I don't agree with that kind of ban. I should be absolutely clear. Films can be very difficult, and the subject matter of films can be quite challenging, thought-provoking, and it might be such that one might disagree with the content or the approach or the worldview espoused within the framework of a particular work of cinema. And that's perfectly possible. I mean, we cannot expect to agree with every single thing that we see and hear in this world. I mean, I don't think that the fact that the world is filled with so many potential viewpoints and opinions, I think, sort of counts that out in terms of a statistical possibility, perhaps. So that's not to say that every single film that I will see will always be something that I will agree with or will be agreeable to my own worldview and state of mind, for instance. I have seen a number of films in my time that have maybe provoked me or maybe even angered me or really made me very much disagreeable to the contents and the like, right? Have I been offended by certain films? There might have been a few that I have been offended by. So It's not like I have watched every single film, and every single film that I've watched I've loved. It's nothing like that at all. So I understand the feeling that one could have after watching a quote-unquote difficult film, and maybe someone feels very offended by what's being portrayed there, especially when we consider that cinema is, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it might be a short amount of time, but over 100 years. And so during that time, we can understand that societies and points of view can change over time, and therefore things that have been depicted a number of years ago might not necessarily mix well with certain viewpoints in contemporary society and that sort of thing. And so I understand that sometimes certain subject matters that might have been acceptable back in the day might not necessarily be acceptable now. And so this is the byproduct of human history. And I think it's really fascinating, therefore, to look at cinema in this way and even consider that even one film that might not necessarily have been quote-unquote offensive back in the day could have the potential of becoming offensive after some time has elapsed, or after the progress or the development or change that occurs with any natural progression in any kind of, let's say, society. So this is all to say that, yes, films have the potential to offend, and that could be something that makes the film somewhat disagreeable to one. And there's nothing wrong with the reaction of being offended by a film. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with expressing the reaction of being offended by a certain film. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And I think there is nothing wrong inherently with the notion of not liking a film at all and not wanting to watch a film because one feels offended by the film for whatever reason. And one doesn't necessarily need to always justify why you are offended by a film. You don't have to say why a film offends you in any kind of concrete terms. I mean, this is not a debate necessarily. I mean, your relationship one-on-one with a particular film is yours alone, and so you have the power to decide for yourself if a particular film is right for you or not. If something is not agreeable to you, then you need not watch it. And so these are choices that are left up to each of us individually, and I hope that I'm clear about this. It is a means of, in a certain way, it is a means of exercising our freedom of thought in a way that we can essentially choose what it is we can watch, and we can choose, or we can feel free to be comfortable with the fact that we can react in any way that we want in terms of interacting with a work of art. So, okay, so with that in mind, of course, and then let me just finish that thought by saying that, of course, when we react, other people might react to our reactions, and so I think that's natural, and that leads to a progress of discussing with other people what a certain work means in the context of my viewpoint versus another viewpoint, and then hopefully that leads to discussions, right? But even in that, even if there are disagreements between people or among people about what a film means and how a film reacts, that doesn't necessarily negate one's ability to feel a certain way or react a certain way to a film, right? Of course, people might disagree with our reaction. People might want to debate us with that notion. Of course, I'm not suggesting otherwise. That's just the natural progress of things. But I'm talking purely about one's reaction, okay? So there's that. So there is the possibility, especially with a difficult film, that one might react in a certain way, okay? But then the question becomes, if there is a group of people who react in that way of being offended by a film for whatever reason, does that justify banning such film? I think that's a completely different question. And therefore, if we think about the reason for wanting to ban this film, which is namely that a group of people are quote-unquote offended, then I have to say, I'm sorry, but I disagree with such a ban. And the reason is because it seems to me that there needs to be a stronger justifiable reason for a ban, because a ban is quite a big deal. If an organization or a government or some kind of organizational body or some other body that has the power to withhold or ban or censor a work of art has that power to exercise that power, then I think it really needs to be done after much consideration and thought, and after there is a justifiable reason for this. Now, of course, this term justifiable reason is itself a kind of amorphous thing, but it really comes together in terms of the society that we are in. And as you know, societies more or less coalesce around certain norms. Of course, there could be debates about what norms should govern over others, and therefore this leads to political debate and political parties and the election of one political party over the other in terms of a democratic society, of course. And I completely understand that. And with elections come new legislative movements or movements that are taken on board in terms of legislation that lead to laws that are enacted, and et cetera. Those lead to that are based on certain policy views within a certain group dynamic. That's called a democratic society. So based on that, for instance, there's this notion that, for instance, let's take an easy one. Murder is wrong. The killing of one human being by another human being is considered wrong, and therefore there are laws that are enacted in order to prevent such acts from taking place, right? In terms of the imposition of punishment and the harshness of such punishment, etc., to deter such acts from taking place in the first place. So that's a very, I think, easy example of a kind of policy that is enacted in a democratic society or government, right? And so based on these policies that exist, right, we can have certain laws that are enacted that lead to the curtailing of certain rights going forward. So that's not to say, again, this is returning to my point, which is that's not to say that the ban itself is inherently right or wrong. It's the justifiable reason or the reason that is linked to such ban which makes the ban right or wrong, I think. Okay, so therefore let me return therefore to the earlier question is this notion of people being offended, is that enough of a justifiable reason to justify the ban? And I have to say, no, it doesn't seem that way to me. I'm not sure if the feeling of being offended is enough of a harm that would justify banning a work of art. As I say, it is fine to react the way one can with a very difficult film. It is fine to therefore not want to watch the film. It is fine to disagree with others who may have a different reaction to that same film. It is fine to even have a heated debate and argument with someone else who has a different view of such film. I think those are fine, and those lead to discussions and heated arguments and debates online and otherwise all the time. Of course, that goes without saying in this this discussion of film, which is a very passionate subject for everyone. But to ban the film is a completely different question, and one that I think should be avoided in this circumstance, because it doesn't seem to be a reasonable the reason doesn't seem to be reasonable enough to justify such a heavy result of a ban. We have to remember what a ban means, right? A ban is the taking away of the ability of everyone to watch that film, not just the group that is offended, but even those who are not offended by such film. You're taking the right of everyone to be able to watch the film and to be able to make the decision himself or herself about whether or not the film is indeed offensive or not. So I think that is too much of a grave result that would, in fact, be somewhat of an impairment to this notion of, I mean, if you want to put it in terms of a constitutional, not even constitutional, but a general democratic, small d, democratic terms, that it impairs the notion of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and therefore I think this notion is too great vis-a-vis the notion of being offended, on the other hand, to therefore say that this is a justifiable reason for this. I don't think that at all. I think this is not a justifiable reason enough to resort to such a drastic result, that is a ban of an expression. So to answer the question, Peter, I don't, yes, and I don't mean to suggest at all, Peter, that you were feeling one way or the other. I think you and I perhaps espouse the same viewpoint, which is, I think the ban itself seems to be too great or too drastic a result if the means is to avoid the offending of a certain group of people. And so I would say that I don't agree with such a ban, and therefore I am not, yes, let me just put it like that. I don't agree with such a ban. Now, again, does that mean that I am disagreeing with all bans total? Again, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that it depends on what the reason is that is linked to such ban, and if that reason is justifiable enough to justify such a ban, then it's a question that's worth considering. But in the specific scenario that our dear friend Peter posed, I have to say I disagree with such a ban. Okay, my friends, sorry about the long-winded approach of this, the answering this question. I hope you can forgive me. But I do think it is a very important question to answer. And once again, Peter, I'm very sorry for taking so long to answer, but I hope you can forgive me. And I hope, more importantly, I hope you, my dear friend, are doing well, and that things are treating you well, and your family and friends are doing very well. So thank you very much, my friends. And if you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. I would love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, cheers.